Gareth, ready?
Sorry, Chair. You need to come on screen momentarily. Sorry, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I've been having some problems today. Hopefully you can hear me. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. If you wish to speak, can you please use the remote raise hand function? And when invited to address by me, please could you ensure that your microphone and camera is on to ensure you can be seen and heard when actively participating. Please ensure all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. So welcome everyone to committee today. We'll get underway with the agenda. So item 1, apologies for absence. If there are any, I've had one from Councillor Steve Haynes. Gareth, are there any others?
Yeah, Cooperative Member Lucy Barraclough. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Gareth. Any others? None that I can see. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting on the 19th of January. Are we happy to approve those, or are there any comments?
Happy to approve them, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. Lovely. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest and the nature of such interests, and that there'll likely be several of these, given there are school governors on the committee. So if there are any declarations of interest, could you please let us know? Councillor Hennessy.
One, I'm a governor at Roos Primary School, governor at St Helens Primary School, a member of the Vale of Glamorgan School Governors Association, and if we're doing anything with SACRA, I'm also the vice chair of that as well. And if I think of any more, I'll let you know.
Please let us know. Councillor Avia. My screen.
There may be some issue with Councillor Avia's connection, Chair. So do you want to move on to the next person with their hands up?
Sure. Thanks, Gareth. I think I'm having some issues at my end, so if you feel free to interject, that's great. Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. We're not able to hear you at the moment. Sorry, there we are. Thank you.
You hear me now? Is that better? Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm Chair of Governors at Pencoitry and Whitmore and Barry Sixth Form, Chair of the SACRA and Vale, I sit on the Vale School Governors Association. Thanks.
Okay, Chair. Are you? Can you hear us, Chair? Sorry, Chair. You've frozen for me. I'm not sure if anyone else has got the same issue.
Thank you, Martis.
Hi, I'm Martin. I'm the governor at St Richard Gwyn Catholic High School and chair of the Vale Governors Association.
Thank you. Geraint Scott's next.
Hi, yeah, I'm Vice Chair of Governors at Yscol Pen-y-Garth and Chair of the Finance Committee there.
Lovely. Thank you, Geraint. Councillor Asbury.
Should we go to Councillor Payne, Chair?
Yes. Thanks, Gareth. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a school governor at Palmerston Primary, but can I just say in future, is there any chance we could have all of our school governor stuff as part of the minutes so that we don't have to go through declarations at the beginning of the meeting. It would make life a lot easier. Thank you.
Yes, I agree.
Sorry,
I agree with that.
sorry. Can I just? I don't understand what Councillor Payne is referring. What does she mean? Sorry, can I just ask her to elaborate a bit further on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So,
Do you mean
for
your
instance,
dispensations? Is it your dispensations?
yeah, well, your declarations as well. If you're a school governor of a certain school, you're that for that term. So if it's just on declared, then we don't have to go through it every time. Everybody
I'll have to
will
check
know.
that with the monitoring officer, but the routine is we do declare every meeting. I can raise with the monitoring officer, and she's happy to.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if it would make life easier because
It would. I agree with you. It absolutely would. But obviously, you know, if you're looking at this meeting and you're not declared it, then obviously the members of the public may not understand you've declared previously. So we'll have a look, but yeah,
All
need
right.
to check it by the monitoring officer.
We'll
But
go,
I understand
Nick.
what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is that everyone? I think Kathy Riddick. We've done Kathy. Councillor Hodges.
Hi, Ysgolson Barrack.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Claire Werrett.
Hi Chair, just to declare an interest as Head of Education for the Diocese of Llandaff, I would work directly with some of the schools affected, the Church and Wales schools, so just letting you know that.
Thanks very much, Claire.
And sorry, Chair, I
Much appreciated.
don't want to speak for Councillor Avia, Chair, but she has emailed me before the meeting, and if she doesn't take any issues, I can just advise the committee that she's declaring interest on the school balances. She's a school governor, and she's got a family member that works in one of the schools, so I can pass that on for Councillor Avia. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Julie, for that. Great. So move to agenda item 4. So to confirm voting rights, over to Gareth.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So we've got 3 members with voting rights on present in the meeting today. So that's Kathy Riddick, Dr. Martin Price, and Claire Werrett, and they can vote on any educational matter raised at the committee tonight. Lucy Barrowclough's giving her apologies, Chair. So yeah, it's just a 3 tonight. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Gareth. Okay, agenda item 5 then. So it's a presentation, an update on the Vale of Morgan Council school balances. So it'll be Matthew Curtis, and of course, thank you to Trevor Baker. You've appeared many times on this committee and always updated us and kept us informed. So we'd like to thank him for all his hard efforts and I know hard work. So over to Matthew.
Diolch, Chair, and Noswaith Arbawb. Thank you very much. You will have to bear with me, I'm afraid. This is just my 3rd week in this role, so still getting to terms with everything, understanding the context and picture, but what I have done is I've directly updated the slides that Trevor Baker went through last year, just so that you can see that clear direction of travel and how things are progressing. Gareth, is anybody there able to share the slides?
Yeah, they'll come on screen now any second. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you very much. Excellent. So the next slide is just a summary of the State of the Nation in Wales, was it the State of Education in Wales report that was published last year by the WLGA. Again, a couple of these initial slides I've left in the context because we'll be going through the same slides with Performance Scrutiny Committee on Wednesday, and they haven't seen some of this context. So I won't spend too long talking through this because I know this was covered previously, but this report essentially creates quite a difficult picture in terms of the financial context in schools across Wales, which just shows that it's not entirely unique, the situation we're in, albeit it is more challenging than it is in other local authorities. But based on this report, they're looking at around 1/3 of primary schools and about half of secondary schools across Wales going into deficit budgets. And it goes into some detail around different pressures around supporting learners with additional learning needs, underfunding of pay awards, and higher cost of workforce challenges that are contributing to that position across the country. If we then move on to the next slide, it will just show that national context in terms of the average spend per pupil. This is something that has been talked about many times about the Vale of Glamorgan, that the average spend per pupil is low when compared to others. As you'll see in 2025-26, the Vale of Glamorgan was 18th out of the 22 local authorities, and that is primarily due to the funding that comes directly from Welsh Government, which is based on a formula whereby the Vale of Glamorgan has lower allocations than others on deprivation and sparsity. If we move on to the next slide, this does show a very different picture in terms of the average spend per pupil for learners with additional learning needs. So it just shows that the Vale is responding to is spending a lot of education budget on learners with additional learning needs, at the 4th highest of the local authorities and 2nd highest in terms of delegated expenditure, which is the line identified in blue. So again, that all just shows a very tough national picture, but also a really tough local picture here in the Vale of Glamorgan that we're dealing with in terms of the funding of our schools. And if we move on to the next slide. Again, this is primarily for Wednesday's meeting, but just a little bit of an overview really of school funding. Essentially, we receive funding from the Welsh Government and we allocate a funding within the council's education, within the council's budget that's set every year. We allocate an amount for education, and we also receive a large number of grants that are for education and to be issued to schools. We fund schools directly through a funding formula. There are a lot of regulations around that funding formula in terms of what should and shouldn't be delegated and the freedom that should be given to schools for that delegated funding, but it does require 70% of the funding to be linked to pupil numbers. Every local authority has to consult with the budget forum on their funding formula each year and any changes to their scheme for finance in schools, and we must also consult with head teachers and governing bodies that that are affected by any proposed changes. Every year we issue the budget individually through the funding formula to schools and governing bodies, and it is for them then to develop their spending plans within the context of that budget that they're allocated, and they are able to take forward any surpluses or deficits into future financial years. And they have until the 31st of May each year to develop those spending plans. So we're in the thick of that really important process here where we've issued the budgets and the schools are working hard to develop those spending plans. And as I mentioned, they can take forward any deficits or any surpluses. So every year, if they're moving forward a deficit, it makes their position even harder than the next year because they have to look at their in-year spending, but also recovering any deficits that they've accumulated previously. So if we move on to the next slide. This then just gives that kind of context, that breakdown of the school budget. So the school budget of 25-26, 85% of that budget is spent on staff. So it just shows that schools' opportunities are very limited when it comes to making savings. The majority of their funding gets spent on staff. Therefore, any kind of real opportunities for significant savings are going to come from reviewing that staffing ratios and the number of staff that they have, responding to demographic changes. As I mentioned earlier, most of our funding comes from Welsh Government through the Revenue Support Grant and is allocated as part of the council's budget, but we do receive a large chunk of money for different grants. So as you can see there, in 25-26, around 14% of our gross budget was from different grant income streams. Schools have supported efficiency savings over the last 3 financial years as well, as part of the council's response to declining budgets. So that also means that schools have to respond to those, which can obviously, in some situations, if they're not making direct savings, increase their deficit. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, this is the one that provides a bit of direction of travel based on the previous information that was presented in December. So at the end of 25-26, we had a balance of minus £4.1 million across our schools. So we had essentially a deficit position of £4.1 million. The projection then for the end of 25-26, so the end of this month, previously when these slides were presented, we were indicating that there would be a total deficit of £15.3 million. Now, because of the work that has happened over the last few months, that has now reduced to £13.4 million. And then by the end of 26-27, we were previously estimating a £30.3 million deficit. That's gone down to 27.2. And 27-28, likewise from 45.9 to 41.2 million pounds. So there has been a positive direction of travel in terms of bringing down those deficits and setting those recovery plans, but there is still significant work to do. Now, the second half of the slide shows the variation between different school categories in terms of their end of year 31st of March 2025, so the end of last year. And we had quite a significant variation between primary, all through and secondary. So you had a difference of £1.4 million between the... Oh, have you lost sound?
Don't believe so.
Okay on my side.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Oh.
Matthew, all good.
No problems. Some of my colleagues are mentioning that they've lost some sound, so no problem. So essentially in primary schools we have variance of £1.4 million. That means there's £1.4 million at the end of last year between a surplus, the larger surplus and the largest deficit. Same with all through schools, there was a difference of £461,000, and then in secondaries there was a difference of £1.38 million. Based on the projections for the outturn position at the end of this financial year, we're expecting those variations to grow in each of those three categories as well, so they're getting further away from each other. So again, this shows quite a unique picture in the Vale, where some schools are able to deliver a balanced budget and others aren't, and we're working with them quite a lot to really get into the detail of why that is and what's causing some schools to move into a deficit and others able to deliver a surplus. The good news is we have reduced the number of schools that are projecting a deficit by the end of this year from 38 to 33. So again, another positive line in terms of the direction of travel, but still some way to go. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. This just goes down into a bit more detail on those projections by the different sectors. So just to give some headlines here, in terms of the primary schools, we've had a change of £625,000 since December. So we've reduced the deficit by 625k. In secondaries, we've reduced the deficit by £364,000. The all-through school one has gone up slightly by 162, and we've also increased surpluses across schools by £1.1 million. So that's how we've had that kind of positive direction of travel through the different categories. And then if we can move on to the next slide. So a lot of attention, of course, has been on the 7 schools that were issued with formal warning notices. So I've just done a slide that just looks at this kind of section, this piece of work. So this goes back to last June when the initial recovery plans were submitted. There was an initial focus on the 10 schools that were considered to be in the worst position following the submission of those plans. Informal warning notices were then issued to those 10 schools in September, requesting more evidence and updated recovery plans. Those were returned in October, and 3 schools were deemed to have made sufficient progress, and the savings that they put forward are identified with it on that slide. So 346k in year 1, up to £5.2 million in year 3. So no further action was taken on those 3 schools, and they went into monitoring of their recovery plans. However, formal warning notices were then issued to the 7 schools that were deemed to have not made sufficient progress on recovery by January 2026 and had to develop further recovery plans by January 2026. Now, the impact of those recovery plans across those 7 schools showed an in-year improvement of 851, so a significant amount of savings to find within a financial year, considering they were currently halfway through it. And then in year 2, £2.9 million, and then that going up to £5.8 million in year 3. As a result of that significant amount of work and significant progress, the formal warning notices are withdrawn, as it was considered more appropriate to have regular constructive dialogue with those head teachers and governors and working with them to ensure that they could deliver their recovery plans without those formal warning notices remaining in place. So since then, now as I mentioned earlier, we've now issued the 3-year budget allocations to schools. They were issued a couple of weeks ago, and schools are working very hard to develop their spending plans by the 31st of May, ready to submit them to us. And this will be a big undertaking for them, but it'll also be a lot of work for us to work with the schools and then review them afterwards. So if we could go to the next slide. In terms of the next steps, the 7 schools that were issued those warning notices and had them withdrawn, we will continue to monitor the recovery plans working with them. So we'll have regular meetings with them to make sure they're implementing those recovery plans and to provide them with any support or help they need to implement those, to make those savings and reduce those deficits. But a big piece of our work now will be focusing on stemming the flow and stabilizing this situation. So not just focusing on the 7 schools that have the largest deficit budgets, but looking at those that will be our next load of schools to have deficit budgets if we don't have that early intervention. So these will be the schools that are having large in-year deficits. So they're not able to deliver an in-year balanced budget regardless of any kind of rollover of a big surplus or deficit. And those that we don't feel are providing robust recovery plans. So that early intervention will be key to us kind of stabilizing this situation and making sure that we don't end up in a position where we have unsustainable deficits across our schools. We'll be spending quite a lot of time over the next couple of months providing support and guidance to head teachers and governors. We appreciate that this, we do ask a lot of head teachers and governors in setting these budgets. It's a very busy time. It's a very complicated time. So we will be providing them with support and advice and finding out what they need to help them fulfill their duties to develop these spending plans. We're putting in some additional resource within the council to support the monitoring of these recovery plans. So we will have a dedicated officer that will be working with schools to monitor recovery, monitor budgets to make sure that we're meeting the commitments that get set. We're also developing case studies. Some schools have done incredible work over the last year or two to balance their budgets, and we really want to use them to show other heads that this can be done. So we want to create those case studies. We want to support partnership working, and not just within our borders, but within other local authorities to find out what they do differently to make sure they can deliver that balanced budget. And we're also working with other local authorities to find out about their approaches to funding, to pedagogy, teaching and learning, supporting learners with additional learning needs. So we can also make sure that we're doing all we can from a system perspective to ensure that we're efficient and we use our budget to the best of our ability. And then we also have a range of transformation projects that are ongoing that we're supporting and rolling out to also support schools to achieve savings. So if we go on to the next slide. The first part of that piece of work is looking at contracting and procurement. We have an officer in the council that's supporting this work and reviewing different contracts and procurement, and it's already generating some really good savings. So since April last year, we've made a saving of £155,000 on switching schools to waste. So that's providing a really good service for less money, but it's also putting money back into the council as the schools are buying this provision directly from the council rather than using external providers. So that's a really positive one. And there's also work going on more wider than that, looking at grounds maintenance, looking at how we do consistent bookings for let-ins, and also other areas around kind of supporting supply staff and agency workers. We're also looking, as I mentioned earlier, around teaching and learning and how we measure that impact, how we do things differently, how we can look at innovation within teaching and learning, and also how we can use digital things like artificial intelligence, all those sorts of things to kind of ease pressure on schools and allow them to do things more efficiently and effectively. And I think that's the last slide. Am I right? Yes. So yeah, that's a little whistle-stop tour really of where we are in terms of the school balances. Some really good progress, and I think we do need to kind of mark that. That's really, really good, but we still do have a significant way to go as well in terms of stemming that tide and making sure that we can deliver that balanced budgets over the next couple of years. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. And it was remiss of me not to welcome you to your new position, and thank you for coming to present to us tonight. We're really grateful. So over to committee members. A lot of hands up already, so we'll start with Claire Werrett.
I think I put my hand up by mistake. I was just so pleased to see Matt there. So while I've come on screen, just a warm welcome to Matt and great to hear his presentation. So I did actually click that by mistake, but thank you very much, Matt, and very well explained. Thank you. I shall hand the questions over to somebody else and take my hand down. Sorry, Chair.
No worries at all. Thanks, Claire. Councillor Hennessy.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the report, Matthew. Do appreciate the report. I got a couple of questions. I'm just trying to work out where you're expecting schools to save money. Because according to these figures I'm looking at in front of me now, 85% of the school budgets are on staff, 7% are on premises, and 6 or 8% on others. It's just, for me, where does the money come from? It's like, if your school's £1 million in deficit and you're having to pay that back over 5 years, you're having to find a £200,000 saving. Where from? And to me, I'm just finding this awkward, quite awkward. So for me, the only way you can save major savings is redundancies. And I don't think anybody wants that. You said you've saved £100,000 so far, if not a bit more, from procurement. If your school's £1 million in deficit, that's pennies. So if possible, can you answer them? I might have more. I'm just trying to go over your figures, if that's okay.
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yeah, yes, please, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you know, you have hit the nail on the head. It's a really challenging situation, really challenging context. The most important thing to do, and what we're really focused on with Working Schools on, is developing a balanced in-year budget. That has to be our position number one, to make sure that we're not mounting up these historical deficits and continuing to be in an unsustainable position. There are a range of ways that schools can make savings. Some of that, as you mentioned, is through reducing staff. That is inevitable when we're dealing with demographic changes. As our learner numbers decline in schools, that will require fewer teachers and support staff to teach them. It's also looking at additional payments that we give, so how much of our leadership, what our leadership structures look like, and doing some comparisons across other schools. It's looking at teaching learning responsibilities, so additional top-ups that are given to staff to do pieces of work. It's also looking at how we deliver courses. So, for example, you may still be providing the number of options at GCSE and A level that you were when you were double the size. That's something you have to review because we have to deliver that within a set budget. There are, as I said, other wider things that you can look at. And whilst I appreciate that the savings are small, when you look at them on individual school with procurement, we do need to explore in all avenues to support as much savings as we can to support schools so that they don't have to make redundancies. What schools, of course, are generally doing is they're looking at where there is natural loss of staff through retirement and whether they cannot replace roles, and they're also looking at voluntary redundancy positions.
Okay. You just mentioned GCSEs, but as you know, most of our schools that are in financial deficit are primary schools. This does not affect them. So they're not having to worry about that currently. And I just remembered what my other question was. You said that there was originally 10 schools were sent letters. 3 were seen to be deemed sufficient enough to have shown you that they have gone through a process to help themselves out, and that left 7. I can't remember if you said those 7 then received letters. Then, to my knowledge, the Vale of Glamorgan Council withdrew those letters. Was that down to threat of any legal action from the unions if you didn't do that? And I don't know if you can answer that one.
I'm sure Liz may want to come in to provide more context, because of course I've only been here for 2 weeks, so I wasn't part of those discussions. But my understanding is the main driver for removing those warning notices was because they'd made sufficient progress and submitted revised recovery plans, which is actually what was asked for them in those warning notices, and then it switched to monitoring those and continuing to work with them to support them in a constructive way rather than a way that maybe was dividing us from them. That's my understanding, but Liz, please come in if you want to add otherwise. And just on the GCSE points, appreciate that was just one option that secondary schools are. Of course, secondary schools tend to have the biggest hurdle to go over when it comes to their budget outturn position. Primary schools are still in really challenging, but we're talking about a much smaller average amount. So what we're looking at there is exploring things like, split classes, split age class groups may be required if numbers have declined, looking at support staff, but also looking at TLRs, leadership, non-working, leadership positions, all those sorts of things. So again, still all staffing related, but just a different context that you'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. If I have anything else, I'll come back.
Thanks very much. Over to Councillor Perry.
Sorry, just to clarify, Chair, obviously Councillor Perry is not actually a member of the committee, so I just want to make that clear to everybody that he's speaking as a non-committee member. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for pointing out. Content.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a good question. So I mean, I'm probably a little bit further behind other members of the committee and not so experienced in educational matters, but I've got some figures in front of me. So I know that we've got a declining birth rate and declining number of children going through primary school education, but the figures I've got in front of me show that we've got 2,500 empty places in primary schools in the Vale of Glamorgan, and we've shown on the side that 70% of funding is based on the number of pupils that are in the schools. So we've got one school that's got 200 empty seats in it. Other schools have got over 100 empty seats, so they're far from full. And just last week, we gave plan permission for a new 420 place school in Cowbridge, which is going to add another 200 empty seats in Welsh medium learning classes in the Vale of Glamorgan, taking it to about 970 empty seats in Welsh medium learning. Now, I'm just wondering, obviously you can have fewer teachers, so you don't need to have all the teachers. You can cut costs when you've got an empty school in teaching staff, but you've got the building maintenance costs, whether it's solar panels, air source heat pumps, etc., which are pretty much fixed costs, whether you've got 200 pupils in there or 80 pupils in there. And I'm just wondering, for these new schools that we're building, and yes, we may close some, but isn't that worsening up the financial situation of schools, that the fact that they are running some at 50% capacity, some at 60% capacity? I'm just a little bit confused and uncertain on that. So perhaps Matthew could give us some answers on how, not being full, these schools are coping financially.
Yes, I'm happy to. In terms of surplus capacity, it's something that we obviously want to avoid as a local authority, and we will always be regularly reviewing our number of pupils on roll and projections to make sure we have an efficient education system. One thing I would say is school organisation isn't quick. Any changes we make to school organisation requires quite significant consultation to go through that process, and that is something that we will be continuing to review to make sure that we respond to these budget pressures pressures, and part of that puzzle will be looking at our education systems. I've already referenced we do have a declining birth rate, which does start to increase surplus capacity. What I would say is schools should be developing their budget to their numbers on roll, not to their capacity. So they're funded for the children that are in there. So in terms of developing their class structures, their staffing structures, they should be doing that based on the numbers that they have, and to accommodate things that you said that are fixed cost, they're dealt with through the funding formula through what we call fixed allocations, or allocations that are driven by floor area. So that means that those fixed costs do get accounted for within our funding formula that we've agreed with our schools. I'm not saying that's perfect, because that still means when a school gets bigger, we've got to put more money into that school through the funding formula. But as I said, it does take time for school organisations to changes to become fully embedded, and for schools to fill up when you make changes.
Thank you for that. Martin Price is next.
I've got 2 points to make. One is looking at your slide. Obviously, you've made good progress in terms of moving from 15 million down to 13 million for this year, the deficit which ends next week, for the year that ends next week. But you're talking another 13 million for next year, and then more than that again for the year after that, which to me seems to be rather more than the Vale's free reserves at the moment, which I think is a difficult situation as far as the Vale as a whole is concerned. And I would suggest that if we've got 2/3 of the schools in the Vale in deficit, that's not a school problem, it's a Vale or a Wales problem in terms of not providing enough money to run a school properly, or being able to meet all the regulations and the constraints put by Estin and everybody else, and the expectations in terms of standards for each school within the money they're given. And that's a systemic problem. There may be some schools within that who are outliers, which are the ones you're looking at. But overall, I would say that was a major system problem, not an individual school problem. And I'm a bit concerned that the Vale is making it school problem rather than Vale problem or Wales problem. The second point I wanted to make, you've talked all the way through about support to head teachers and governing bodies in order to reduce, looking at how they're structuring the schools and how much money they're spending. You haven't mentioned the well-being of school leaders or school governors. And my observation and talking to other school governors is that the pressures on head teachers at the moment in the Vale are huge. And I haven't seen very much in the way of initiatives to help the well-being of individuals head teachers who've got an intractable problem, which, as I've said from the beginning, is not their fault. This is a system problem.
Thank you very much. If you're happy for me to just come straight in on that one. I suppose what I would say is I think we appreciate that it is a Wales challenge here. I think that first slide around the WLGA document shows that, you know, finance in schools is challenging in terms of context across Wales. However, as I also mentioned, we do firstly, we do allocate funding to education that's above SSA, so above what Welsh Government say we should be providing to run the education system. We're about £4 million over that, and there's looking to be a little bit more money in it next year as well through the recent budget that was set. So as a local authority, we are prioritising education. We are putting a significant proportion of the council's budget into delivering education across our schools, and we are. And we consult significantly with schools on getting the school funding formula right and fair in terms of how we then distribute that funding. As I said, one of the things that does come up is the significant variation we have between schools. We do have schools that are balancing and schools that are quite similar that are not, and we're trying to do as much as we can to understand that, to see why that's happening, because there's no obvious reason why those schools would be different. And I suppose what I would say is, while the position is challenging in terms of that the 27 million and the 41 million, this is based on the current plans that we have in place, which are now incredibly out of date. The schools have just had their 3-year budgets last week, and I'll be expecting this position to change quite significantly when we receive the spending plans at the end of May, where they're putting their 3-year spending plans in place, and we'll be able to paint a much more accurate picture of the direction of travel on future. And of course, what we're working with head teachers too is to try wherever we can to prioritise some quick savings within the budget, because we'll get the full benefit of them across the 3 years, rather than obviously continuing to run significant deficits and then making savings in year 3. So we're doing all that. We're working closely. I've only been in place, as I said, for 2 full weeks, but I've already met with a large number of head teachers across the Vale, particularly those that are kind of in the most challenging positions, to see what they need in terms of support. After Easter, we'll be looking to send some more information out to provide some additional kind of information and guidance on approaching their spending plans, and we'll be inviting any head teachers or chairs of governors to get in touch with us if they want to discuss the process anymore. But in terms of anything we've done in terms of wellbeing, it's probably a bit too early for me to comment on that.
Thanks very much, Matthew and Martin. Over to Phoebe and Rhian.
Hi. We just would quite like to raise, it was mentioned about cutting support staff, and we kind of wanted to ask whether this would have a disproportionate impact on ALN students, and also what provisions would be made for the people who, like the support staff members who would be made redundant through this scheme, and how ALN children would be supported with fewer support staffs in schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. Appreciate the question. In terms of supporting support staff, I suppose what I would say is we're not targeting any particular groups of staff in terms of this, and schools won't be. They'll be looking at their staffing structures holistically. They'll be looking at their current structure and what's supporting schools, what's not, what's supporting their learners, and maybe what's not necessarily needed for their future curriculum, and they'll be making informed decisions based on those sorts of processes rather than targeting a particular group. But they will, of course, be looking at teaching and non-teaching staff. Supporting learners with additional learning needs is a huge priority for us, and we're doing a lot of work. As you could see from that earlier slide, we're already spending significant proportion of the council's education budget on supporting learners with additional learning needs. That's really important that we meet those needs, but there are also work streams going on to see whether there are other ways we can support learners as effectively, but maybe without putting kind of as much of the council's funding as is currently going within that direction, and supporting learners wherever we can within mainstream education.
Thank you very much. Over to Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you can explain, like March 25, we had a deficit of 4 million. In 1 year, this March, it's 13 million. Could you explain that, please?
Yep. So so essentially the main reason why it's gone up so quickly is because we had a lot of funding within education during COVID that increased the surplus balances that were going across schools, which obviously, as schools are able to move those surpluses forward, a lot of schools were in surplus positions coming into previous financial years. So what they were essentially doing is running an in-year deficit, but that was being covered by a surplus coming forward from a previous year. So it was probably artificially making it look like it was balancing, but in reality it was spending surpluses. So what's happened is we're now in a position where those surpluses run out, and then what you do is you have a larger gap to follow, because you don't just have to bring your in-year down to what your annual budget is. You've also got to bring it down to what you were spending on surplus. You were banking in surplus. So it makes it much more challenging, and it's one of the real complicated things with education, because obviously that transition, that transfer of surpluses and deficits into future financial years means that you're not just looking at your in-year budget like maybe a council department would be. You're always either on the back foot or on the front foot, and it does mean that things can change very, very quickly.
Thank you.
That's a question.
Thank you, Sally. Can't see any more questions as yet. Appreciate, Matthew, you're still very new to the role, but you've been peppered with a lot of questions tonight, and thank you for answering them. In your kind of first couple of weeks in the role, have you had any conversations with representatives from Welsh Government about the funding formula you mentioned? Obviously, you said the Vale is getting less money, perhaps than it should, from the Welsh Government for the funding of education. So have you had any conversations with Welsh Government about that, or are you planning to at some point in the future?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be in a position at the moment to be able to say that we're not getting as much money as we should. All I can say is the facts of the position are, as the Vale, we don't get high scores on either deprivation or sparsity, which are two areas where a lot of other local authorities get funding through their formula. We kind of just miss out on sparsity, and we're not a significantly deprived local authority in terms of free school meals against other areas. So there are reasons for why we're funding at the level we are, and as I said, we also put additional funding in through the council's budget to support education, which I think is really important. But yes, those questions absolutely have to be asked. We have to understand the financial, the way that the funding is distributed from central government, and we also need to report back on the challenges that we're experiencing. I know they'll be looking quite carefully on the situation that's happening, because chances are other local authorities will be following in future years if they don't get a handle on it as well. So yes, we will absolutely maintain that dialogue with Welsh Government to make sure that we share information and share our challenges.
Thank you, Matthew. And then just to give you a little bit of a rest, I think Councillor Birch is on the call. So same question to you as well, Councillor Birch. Are you having those conversations with colleagues in Welsh Government about the funding formula?
This has been brought up on several occasions, yes, I can assure you, and will be brought up again.
Good. Thank you very much. Can't see any other hands up from anyone. So we'll thanks to Matthew for your presentation, and then we'll note the presentation with thanks to Matthew, if you can have a seconder for that. Councillor Hennessy, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item. So it's agenda item 6, summary of Eston inspection outcomes for the autumn term 25 and an update on schools' statutory follow-up. So Caris Pritchard is going to take us through that.
Diolch yn fawr, Chair, a noswaith dda. You've had a report as part of the papers, and you'll see there's 2 parts to the report. To begin with, an overview of the inspection outcomes for the autumn term 2025, and then the second part looks at the progress of schools in a statutory follow-up. So we'll be looking at those, the 3 schools there as well. So to begin with, in terms of the schools that were inspected in the autumn term, you will see that 3 schools received a core inspection. So they were Gladstone Primary, Colcott Primary and Ysgol St Barrick. And you've got further information about those inspection reports in Appendix A. In terms of the 3 schools, there was no follow-up work identified. And in terms of Eston, when they do visit a school and identify innovative or effective practice, they write a spotlight. And you will see in relation to the 3 schools that were inspected in the autumn term that there is at least 1 spotlight identified in each school. So in terms of Gladstone, you'll see there's a reference to the school's highly effective environment, referencing the indoor and the outdoor, and the impact that has on younger people, particularly in terms of their independence. There's also another spotlight in terms of the school's partnership working to support pupils and families. In Colcott's inspection report, there's a spotlight highlighting the school's effective partnership working and its provision to meet the needs of families, and a focus and a reference there to a family engagement officer and the role of Elenco in particular there. And then Ysgol St Barrack, they have a spotlight outlining a staff charter that's been developed with staff to support performance evaluation at the school. In terms of Appendix 3, for those of you who want further information about the spotlights, Appendix 3 outlines all spotlights that have been identified in Vale Glamorgan schools since September 2024. Now, since September 2024, Estyn would visit a school for a core inspection and an interim inspection during a period of 6 years. In terms of an interim visit, one school received an interim visit in the autumn term, and that was St Helens Catholic Primary School. And the focus of that interim was their 2 recommendations following their Estyn inspection in October 2022. So there was a focus on the school's self-evaluation and monitoring processes, and also in terms of the quality of teaching and the impact on more able learners. So moving on to the second part of the report, this focuses on schools that are in a statutory follow-up in the Vale of Glamorgan. There's 3 schools, Pencoitra in special measures and Fairfield and St Richard Gwyn, both in significant improvement. We'll begin with Pencoitra, and you'll see in terms of Pencoitra as a secondary school in special measures, there's a reference to a multi-agency panel that's been established, and that panel includes Estyn, representatives from the school and the local authority. And 2 meetings of that panel were held during the autumn term. In December 2025, Estyn undertook a monitoring visit, as it does on a termly basis, to the school, and the focus was on recommendation 3 about improving the quality of teaching and assessment, and recommendation 5 on improving the provision to develop the standards of pupil skills. And what you've got in the report is a flavour of some of the findings from that monitoring visit. You'll see reference to the fact that Estyn acknowledged the fact that teaching and learning is beginning to improve in the school, and in particular, the school's culture for collaboration and professional learning has a key role to play in that. There's reference to behaviour management as being positive, and the classroom relationship and professional working relationship that's in place between staff and pupils. But there remains further work in relation to ensuring pupils engage further in lessons. Estyn recognised that assessment practices are developing, and there's reference to live feedback, in the moment feedback, and also whole class feedback there. There's recognition that there's been recent leadership changes in terms of skills and the development of skills across the school. And this is beginning to have an impact on pupils' literacy and numeracy skills. There's now dedicated skills lessons in place for pupils with weaker skills ability. But there is a need for the school and leaders to develop this programme to focus not only on the data, but also on self-evaluation findings. There's a lot of literacy work underway, and that's ongoing, but there's further work to be undertaken to ensure appropriate literacy opportunities across the curriculum, across a wide range of subjects. In the same way, numeracy identification processes, they appear appropriate, but again, there's a need to develop numeracy across the curriculum, and there's a way, to monitor the impact of that moving forwards. And there's a similar theme in terms of digital skills. At the moment, the use of digital is largely restricted to ICT and lessons in particular. So there's a need to enhance the provision across the curriculum. Moving on now to the two schools that are in significant improvement. Fairfield Primary were inspected in March 2025, and their PIAP was improved by Estyn in July 2025. As noted in the report, we're aware that there's temporary leadership arrangements for Fairfield for this academic year, and that involves an interim executive head teacher and also an acting head of school. There's support available from Central South Consortium in particular for the school, and that relates to curriculum, teaching and learning, mathematics and numeracy and Welsh. There's also ongoing support from the school improvement team in the local authority, and the support aligns closely with the Estyn recommendations. In terms of monitoring progress, we monitor progress in the school on a half-termly basis. Moving on then to Sir Richard Gwyn, they were inspected in May 2025. Their PIAP was approved in November. Again, similar to Fairfield, there is support from Central South Consortium in relation to teaching and learning, numeracy and digital, and there's also support particularly in relation to ALN from the local authority. And again, they relate closely to the recommendations that the school received as part of its inspection. And as with Fairfield, we're monitoring the progress on a half-termly basis. So that's just a brief overview of the report and the paper that's been a part of the agenda for tonight, and I'm happy to undertake any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caris. Grateful as ever for the update. So over to members of the committee, if there are any questions or comments. No, that was a very thorough presentation, Caris. There's no hands up, and nothing from me either. So thank you for the presentation. If there are no comments from committee members, so I move that, having considered the Estyn inspection outcomes, we congratulate Gladstone Primary, Concord Primary, and Ysgol St Barrack on their core inspection success, and also that we've considered the progress of Pencoitra High, Fairfield, and St Richard Gwyn to address recommendations there. So if I could have a seconder for that, please. Councillor Hennessy, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Caris.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Chair.
Diolch. Moving on to agenda item 7 then, Learning and Skills Directorate Plan 26-27. So over to Liz, and with support from Morwen and Matthew.
Diolch, Chair. Noswaith dda, bawb. Gareth, can I ask, do you have the presentation ready, please?
Yeah, we'll put it on screen for you any moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. Gareth, if you take me to the first slide, please, the next one, thank you. So I'm going to start off by just giving you an explanation of what the presentation will entail. You'll see I'll provide an overall context to show where all of this sits together, and then take you through the key points for consideration, the structure of plans, their content and their purpose, etc. And then obviously we will look in particular at the Learning and Skills Directorate Plan. So Gareth, if you go to the next slide, and we can actually have a look at the context really. So Vale 2030, the corporate plan, is a key means of meeting our statutory obligations under the Local Government and Elections Wales Act of 2021, and then the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act of 2015. So the Vale 2030 directly informs the Council's key annual plans and the corporate framework of performance measures and performance targets. And as part of the performance arrangements to support the delivery of the 2030 commitments and outcomes, the way in which business planning is undertaken has changed. This attempts then to enhance the integrated approach to corporate planning, and it allows us to align more closely with the Council's annual self-assessment and budget setting process. We've got 5 directorate plans, and these are obviously key elements of the above arrangements. The intention is that a new annual statement will be developed for 26-27, informed by the current, by the Council's current annual assessment findings, the directorate plans for 26-27, and of course, importantly, resident voice. This will be reported to Cabinet later on this year in May. So each plan is reported to the Scrutiny Committee where there is greatest alignment. And obviously, this is why we will be discussing the Learning and Skills Plan later on tonight. And the expectation is that feedback and recommendations from all scrutiny committees will be referred to Cabinet next month for final consideration and approval. Gareth, could you take me to the next slide, please? So I suppose key issues for consideration, in essence, the process and the purpose. So the 5 annual directorate plans are the primary plans for the Council, and each plan details directorate level contributions to the wellbeing objectives and the associated commitments in Vale 2030. The directorate plans will be a key means by which performance for Vale 2030 is monitored and measured. Progressing the activities and associated performance targets detailed in directorate plans will enable us to meet our wellbeing objectives and contribute to the national goals. The Learning and Skills Directorate Plan for 26-27, and it's in the appendix for your perusal, is the primary plan that aligns to the remit of this committee and presents the planned activities, the performance measures, and associated performance targets for 26-27. Just for you to have a fuller picture, all of the directorate plans are included as background papers within the report so that members are able to have a more holistic context for proposed in-year directorate priorities and associated performance targets to deliver on our Vale 2030 commitments. And then the draft directorate plans, they've been subject to moderation initially by members of Strategy and Insight Advisory Group, and then by the Chief Executive with all 5 directors to ensure appropriate activities and alignment with Vale 2030 commitments. The process also confirmed that there are suitable performance measures and these cover service outcomes, user and citizen perspectives, and they are in place to enable us to track progress throughout the year. Relevant Cabinet members have also reviewed the plans ahead of presenting to each scrutiny committee. So, Gareth, could I ask you to take me to the next slide, please? So the structure and plan, the structure and content of each of the plans, they all have 5 sections. So you'd expect to see consistency across all of our plans, saying clearly for each directorate who we are and what we do. So it provides an overview of that particular directorate and its broad functions. The purpose of each individual directorate plan. So this sets out how the directorate will contribute towards delivery of the council's priorities as aligned to the corporate plan of 2025 to 30, and provides a plan on a page summary of its contributions to the wellbeing objectives and outcomes. You'll also see a section in there about managing our resources to deliver our priorities. And this section provides an overview of the directorate's budget, including reshaping efficiency and income targets. It further outlines the key area of focus being taken forward by the directorate, including planned engagement and strategic partnership activities and key corporate and directorate level risks. The 4th section then looks at what we will do in 25-26. It details the key directorate action for 25-26 reflective of the corporate plan of 2025-30. And then the last section, sorry, I made a mistake there, what we will do in 26-27. I'm ever so sorry, I made a reference there to 25-26, sorry, excuse me. And then the last section will be looking at how we measure success. It outlines the directorate's key performance indicators and proposed targets for the coming year as aligned to directorate priorities and the council's wellbeing objectives. And this will include a mix of service, user and citizen perspective measures and service outcome measures that will enable each directorate to demonstrate progress over the year towards its identified priorities and Vail 2030. Each then, for each scrutiny committee members are asked to review the directorate plans for 26-27 and endorse via recommendations to Cabinet the planned activities that will support the delivery of our Vail 2030 commitments and outcomes. And also, scrutiny committees are asked to review and endorse, again, through recommendations to Cabinet, the proposed measures and performance targets for 26-27. And of course, scrutiny members then are asked to refer any comments and recommendations with regard to to our directorate plan to Cabinet for their consideration and endorsement, which we will come on to shortly. So, Gareth, can you take me to the next slide, please? So, we're seeking scrutiny committee endorsement of the Learning and Skills Directorate Plan for 26-27, and this will include looking at the in-year priority activities, the performance measures, and associated performance targets. Broadly speaking, the Directorate's priority actions for the coming year will be focusing on improving education outcomes, looking at community inclusion and engagement through arts, culture, and adult and community learning, youth services and engagement, and then reshaping priorities. Gareth, could you take me to the next slide, please? As you can imagine, obviously a key feature will need to be making sure that we can manage our resources effectively. So you will see a section there providing information on our budget and reshaping information. And for our directorate, it's supported by the base budget of 151 million for 26-27, And as you would expect, there are expectations in there around reshaping and efficiency savings, as well as income targets and other service improvement opportunities. And if I give you an example of this will include how we use our Welsh in Education grant to facilitate meeting our commitments set out in the WESP, enabling pupils with additional learning needs to remain in their local schools, and challenging the culture with regards to ALN value for money in our mainstream schools. And of course, later on in our scrutiny committee, you'll be hearing feedback from the Task and Finish group that looked at our ALN specialist provision. And obviously that will form such a great platform for us as we move forward. We are also looking at reviewing the special school model as well. So key engagement activities for the year ahead will be to build on the work of the Scrutiny Task and Finish group, and we will continue to look at our ALN resource-based consultations. We will look to consultation on our schools admissions arrangements for 27-28 and parent satisfaction survey following the annual admission round. And of course, as you would expect, we've got information about partnership working, which is detailed in the plan. We have a number of risks, some you are already aware of. We've just heard Matt's presentation. We know that our school finances are a concern, and they have been elevated to a corporate risk. Because obviously it impacts sustainability for schools and the council. We have another corporate risk, which is additional needs. This won't be a surprise to scrutiny because, of course, we have discussed before the continuing increasing demand, which outstrips supply sometimes. So there's obviously a need to look at that. Then we have a range of directorate risks that you need to be aware of, because of course you would expect our priorities then to focus on mitigating some of these. One of our areas is to improve outcomes for children who are eligible for free school meals. Across Wales, the gap between non-EFSM children and those that are eligible for free school meals, the gap is not closing. However, the progress is in lockstep, that both groups of children are showing progress in improving outcomes. However, in the Vale, we've actually seen a decrease in the outcomes of our children eligible for free school meals in comparison to those that are non-free school meals. So these are, or could, obviously affect the life chances of our children. So therefore you will see that run strongly throughout our directorate plan. Another directorate risk is uncertainty of funding and cessation of grants. We know that we use a number of our grants to support core services. So that is a big risk for us. We have in the past had an admirable and envious approach to our Sustainable Communities for Learning programme. But of course, this is at risk if there is insufficient match funding for us to continue with our rolling programme. A further risk for us within the directorate is workforce assets and to be able to, the resource mobilisation challenges. Because in the same way that schools are under pressure, so are local authority teams for exactly the same reasons. And therefore there is the risk to delivering sustainable services. And of course, inability to realise transformational savings does, if we are not able to manage those, it does risk our long-term sustainability. Our last director at risk is exclusions and disengagement. Again, the scrutiny will not be surprised to hear that because we've brought our concerns before. There is an increasing need for children showing social and emotional and mental health needs, and we recognise that. Again, this is an increasing area, and again, sometimes demand outstrips supplies. So therefore, we do need to look at how do we go about mitigating the risk and improving the services that we provide. Gareth, could you go on to the next slide, please? Now, I've provided here just a snapshot. There is more in the plan itself, but just to give you an overall flavour of the areas that we're working on. We have a brand new school improvement partnership that came into being earlier this year, and from this month, all schools now are operating on collaborations, and they're called vertical and horizontal collaborations. And I think what would be helpful at some stage, Chair, but maybe a discussion for another time, given that this is new and it's new across Wales, it might be worth maybe offering a briefing session to members if they wanted to know more about the way school improvement is now expected to work across Wales. But again, the purpose of this is that it is an authentic and genuinely school-led, school-to-school model that affects sustainable improvement. And we will be having a particular focus on disadvantaged learners or those that are at risk of disengagement. We're also going to be looking to refine the community-focused schools approach. And we've been very lucky and fortunate because the libraries that we have were successful in bidding to lead on the new National Reading Scheme to tackle those living in disadvantaged areas. So we do look forward to bringing a bit more information to Scrutiny on that once we have got up and running and have something to share with you. We do need to look at improving the quality and consistency of local provision for learners with additional learning needs and social and emotional and mental health needs. Again, we've brought that to committee before, but we will be looking to develop more robust strategies around those. And again, looking forward to maybe sharing that with in briefing sessions with committee members at a later date. Now, we've got a brand new pilot scheme that we're starting, and this came about following full council's support of investing in our youth services so that we can look at genuine ways to support learners, in particular living in disadvantaged areas and those at risk of disengagement, because we are developing, and this to my knowledge is the first across Wales, we're developing pre and post 16 opportunities and working with all directorates within the local authority, identifying apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship opportunities as well, so that we can map out clearly potential pathways for our children. And again, we do have a paper that we would eagerly want to have conversations with our Scrutiny members, again, potentially in a briefing session. But again, I think maybe, Chair, if you and I could have a discussion at some stage for you and I to maybe discuss what is best to bring to Scrutiny for a bit more detail, really. And then lastly, it'll come as no surprise to anybody because, of course, there was a North Wales inquiry into safeguarding. And as a result of that, our bravery brought justice. That's a renewed and robust focus on safeguarding, and it'll be our comprehensive response to the North Wales inquiry. So Gareth, if you could take me on to the next slide, please. So how will we measure success? So the proposed measures and targets are based on past performance trends, previous targets, and available benchmarking data. They also reflect the priority of each indicator for the Council and the realistic potential for improvement. Targets have been set for ongoing indicators where appropriate, while new indicators will also establish baseline data during 26-27. We have increased the number of quarterly and mid-year measures, and this is in direct response to the scrutiny feedback that we had in December with joint performance scrutiny. There will be a mix of service users and service outcome indicators. And the targets are challenging but realistic, and it's informed by trend data, benchmarking, and capacity. So really, that's all I have to say on our plan, apart from obviously would welcome your thoughts about what's contained in the plan and the committee actions of endorsing the plan and the associated performance measures and targets. And then if you've got any comments or recommendations for Cabinet, which I think is for the 16th of April. Diolch.
Thank you, Liz, for the very thorough presentation. Over to committee members now. Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask some questions on some of the actions being raised in the plan. Can I just first touch on Action 8, which is talking about the transformation agenda? And the thing that interests me most is carrying on the work from last year with the school transport review overall. And I'm interested in how you're seeing the final delivery of that working. Are we going to see a final plan of action that comes through the scrutiny process? Or are we going to see action straight away? Is there going to be a specific plan on the matter? I'm just interested what the final outcome you're seeing from that might be in order to track whether we make it this year to finish the review. Action 12 on school councils, youth council and engagement with young people is fantastic to see. And fantastic to see the engagement taken on by the leader with school councils over the budget setting process, which I'm sure made a huge contribution to our decision-making process in the budget. I just wanted to ask if we have any plans for a regular engagement program with school councils as part of this action, in order to ensure that we're regularly updating and communicating with our school councils as to our plans, especially in education, outside of the Joint School Council Network, which I'm glad to be a part of, and is always a helpful session for me at least. And Action 14, you touched on the additional work that youth services will be doing as part of mitigating the number of children in poverty in the Vale of Glamorgan, and the engagement, how positive that will be for young people to keep them in education and keep them in employment. I'm just interested in, outside of the youth services, what other actions are being taken as part of Action 14 in order to ensure that people are claiming the benefits that they have a right to, and also ensuring we get as many people who need the support into services such as citizen advice, as mentioned in the action. Cheers.
I'll try and remember all those questions, Councillor Goodjohn. If I could start by the one I remember most, which is the one on engagement with our young people. Yes, the expectation is that we will be looking to create more of a systematic approach to gathering views. And you are quite right in your observation of how critical the views of the young people were in informing full council decision on whether to proceed with the proposal, and of course it shows that we have to, and it was you that made the point on the night, we have to make sure that we engage in different ways of engaging our youth, our young people, because they don't necessarily engage well to traditional ways, or ways that, you know, if you like, we normally go out to consultation. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that the way we're going about that is to make sure that we're developing the skills within each of the other directorates to make sure that they have automatic or easy access to our young people. So it's about making sure that we use the youth service to signpost and facilitate, because also we're eager to make sure that it isn't one group of young people that is seen as the go-to, if you like, each time, because of course we've got a range of different activities, and we need to make sure that all the directorates know what is happening across all of our various activities, so that we can harness a range of diverse views when we are out to consultation on something. Can I ask Councillor Goodjohn, did that answer the second question that you?
Yes, that's very helpful. I can repeat the other two briefly if it helps. So the first one was on where you see the transport review, school transport review ending. What you think is the final outcome of that? Not in its conclusions, but how we'll see what the conclusions are of that, and the engagement when it comes to schools outside of the youth service, how we try and get young people and also their parents to engage with support and employment benefits and further training opportunities.
Right. So when it comes to the transport, that is truly a transformational agenda item. So it would be wrong of me to say what I'm going to get from just an education point of view, because of course we are working across directorates with that. But I might be able to ask Katie if she's on the call. Is there an update in terms of where we are at with that at the moment? And I don't know if there is, and if there isn't, obviously we can commit to come back to you, Councillor Goodjohn. But I'm wondering, is Katie available just to provide an update?
She is on the call, Chair. Katie, if you could come on screen and provide your comments, please. Katie Williams.
Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I didn't press the big speaker thing, sorry. Yeah, there aren't official updates, but again, I was thinking that was something that we could, you know, we can gather that information and come back with official updates around that. So I'd be happy to do that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, just so that if someone knows outside of the process, it's just good to know what's happening inside, and when we'll, not necessarily when, but what we'll see as an outcome of that, how we'll find out what the review comes to the conclusion of, would be great. That's all I'm looking for there.
Yeah, that's fine. I can do that for you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And then as for the third question, like I said, this is a brand new pilot, if you like, and we're currently about to embark on mapping the process out. So it's not something that should be done in isolation at all as a local authority. So of course we'll be working with our key delivery partners. So we'll be working with schools. So not, you know, so the youth service obviously will be front and centre as part of that. But we will be working with our schools and also our FE providers. And in time, we actually will be looking at local businesses as well. So the first part of it, to make sure that none of our children miss out, is that we need to map it internally within the directorate and across directorates that this will affect, then work with our schools. So again, we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive web so that we can ensure that no child actually falls through any of the gaps and is therefore inadvertently left, if you like, without being signposted to whatever support is out there. So that might sound as if I'm I suppose I don't have an exact answer for you yet, Councillor Goodjohn, because we've only literally just put this pilot proposal together, and we will go about furnishing it during the next couple of months. So again, going back to something else that I said during the presentation, we would welcome periodic opportunities to maybe run briefing sessions for members on various either pilot or initiatives that we are running. Thank you, Chair.
No, that's very that's very helpful. Thank you, much appreciated. It sounds like a broad range of work.
Thanks very much, Ewan. Over to Councillor Payne.
Diolch yn fawr, Elizabeth. Mine is on absenteeism. So one of the things identified was the free school meals provision, and it particularly relates to year 11. And I just wondered if there's a little bit of an update, or what measures are we going to put in place to ensure that? And again, would that then relate to interventions from the youth service?
Thank you, Councillor Payne. If I could ask Morwen, who's on the call. Morwen, are you there, please?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Year 11 is the biggest concern we have, as you know, and as you rightly say, and our FSM learners in particular. And we are seeing that gap in attendance levels between the FSM learners and non-FSM learners. The school that we have, and you're talking about year 11, the school we have with the biggest number of FSM learners is, as you'll be aware, Pencoed High School. Yeah. They have made huge progress and huge inroads in improving their attendance. Unfortunately, the year 10 and 11, I suppose it's a legacy school expectations that they are struggling to adapt to, and the new expectation. But we are seeing huge improvements at 7 and 8, not quite as much at year 11 as yet. But certainly it is something that the school is working very closely with the local authority, and we are seeing those big improvements already. But as you say, it's a big area of focus for us. Was there another part to that question, Helen?
It was just about the involvement of the youth service. So we're looking at...
Yes. Well, yes, the youth service continues to work with our young people. We work very closely with the schools to engage them and engaging them in the school site, you know, as much as we possibly can, and supporting schools to look at their curriculum options as well. That might be, you know, there are some options that are off-site that are not in the school because it better meets the needs of those learners. And if it engages them in their education, then, you know, that is a plus point for us. And all aligned with getting them in school, keeping them safe, but as well so that they don't become NEET, not in education, employment and training as well, post-16.
Fab, thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks very much. Helen, over to Martin Price.
Yeah, I think it's a very comprehensive plan. It looks very well thought out. My concern is how deliverable it is, given Matt's presentation earlier and the figure of £27.2 million deficit for next year, and how the pressure that's being put on schools to reduce that budget impacts on the very laudable outcome you're looking for, which is increasing educational outcomes within the Vale. I can see you've got the risk part of the presentation of the report that you've got there has two corporate risks, one being additional learning needs and the other one school finances. For ALN, that gives a likelihood of 4, which is the maximum, and an impact of 4, but you've only got school finances and there's 3, a likelihood and impact at 4. I would have thought, given the presentation from Matt, that the 27.2 million will have a serious effect on trying to do something about educational outcomes.
In terms of the deliverability of the plan. As you say, there's no shying away from the fact that, it's obviously challenging for our schools at the moment, as it is for our own internal services. Now, what we are doing is, from an ALN point of view, we are working with all of our local authority nearest neighbours. So we are again looking to see, is there good practice that we can learn from? And again, it is about being clear that are there better ways of doing something? It's not about at all diminishing provision, but it is about looking, are there effective ways of meeting the needs of ALN learners? Now, to be fair to the local authority, you did see in Matt's presentation, the local authority is the 4th highest spending in terms of ALN. So it is about just making sure that we are using the money to the best of our abilities to meet the needs of our ALN learners. And of course, the ultimate goal will be to make sure that we can help support schools to be both confident and competent in meeting the needs.
Sorry, I think we've lost your sound.
Oh.
Liz.
Is that anything?
I'm not sure. Sorry, Liz, but you did come through from me. I'm not sure this is a localised issue for Dr. Price, unless the other committee members are finding the same problems.
Mine was fine, both visual and audio.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Price, there may be some issue with your audio. You may have to leave and rejoin.
If he can't hear me, could I follow up the questions to him later?
Well, if you want to continue answering it, it's on the recording, and obviously, Dr. Price can watch it later. Yep.
I remember the ALN one. I can't remember what the other one was, so I'd need his help to remind me, please, or somebody else.
It was about the risk scores and the impact on school finances and ALN. So I think you covered the ALN part. It was just whether
So the risk element for schools, it's new for this year, and again, we have a comprehensive plan to mitigate risks, which we obviously will be reporting to Scrutiny on Wednesday as well. So again, we're not doubting that it's not a risk, but the ALN risk is known, it's been established, it's already in our system, whereas we are now currently working on mitigating actions and a new plan of action to monitor the effectiveness of our mitigations is quite new. Therefore, obviously, we will be reporting on a regular basis to see if that does impact on being able to help schools to manage their budgets more effectively.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of what you said, and I've come back in and I can hear you properly now. I'm still a little concerned that the forecast for the budget for the deficit for this year was 15 million at this time last year. It went down 2 million to the current forecast for next week. 27 million for next year is, even if take 2 million off that, and even if you do look at what other authorities are doing, I can see marginal improvements in terms of how the schools can work. I can't see 27 million pounds worth of savings within schools. And I would have said there was a serious risk for the very first one of your targets, which is improving educational outcomes, let alone all the other ones, laudable that they all are. I just find it quite difficult to see how you're going to do that. That's all.
Would you like me to come in, Liz, on that one as well. I suppose just to add on that one, that the change in position of the deficits that I went through in the presentation was the difference between the position we come through in the midway point of the financial year to now that additional saving. It's not the change in direction of travel from the position we were this time last year. So we've got to acknowledge that while there is a significant gap at the moment in terms of the projections, schools haven't submitted their spending plans yet. So as I said, I'll be expecting those to change quite significantly when spending plans are put in place and schools are starting to put in their plans of where they're going to make some savings given the new allocations that have come forward this financial year. So we're still, well, there's still a long way to go. It's not quite the same. We only saved a couple of million this year. The position would be much wider if you compared it to pre-spending plans being submitted last year, and schools would have just naturally made their savings, and then we wouldn't have needed to take any action because they would have worked within their in-year deficit, their in-year budget.
Okay, thank you. I'm just a bit sceptical as to whether there's £27 million worth of savings to be had. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. Can't see any other hands up at the moment, Liz, but I've got a question. In performance measures, CPM 035, it says talks about the percentage of pupils from the global majority in LA maintained schools who leave compulsory education without an approved qualification. What does that? Would you be able to elaborate on what that means?
Would you mind if I ask Morwen to come in to elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
Sorry, were you asking for clarification on the?
Yeah, the term.
The term. Which part of the term? The global majority?
Global majority, yeah.
So global majority is the term used now widely for what previously used to be referred to as ethnic minority or minority ethnic children.
Okay.
Does that clarify?
It does. Thank you very much, Maureen. So why has that been particularly used here?
That term?
Yes.
Because that is the commonly used term now.
Okay. But I mean, so there's a Welsh Government report commissioned this month. I don't know if you've seen it. That says disadvantaged white young men are least likely to go to university. Centre for Social Justice research this month says white working class boys on free school meals are among the least likely to remain in education after 16. Why aren't they included? Why isn't this something we're aspiring to for all young people in the Vale of Glamorgan? Why pick on that particular group?
We certainly do aspire to that for all young people, and the FSM learners and the boys in particular, as you're talking about, they are, I believe, prioritised within our plan anyway, and they certainly are a focus for us. We look at all our vulnerable groups for all different measures. So we certainly are not choosing global majority learners over white FSM boys. That's another group that we do look at. And, with all of them, for example, looking at attendance, we have got all those groups of learners broken down to all different groups when we are targeting our resources.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, but I think there should absolutely be that equality across all groups. As I said, that Welsh Government report says that, white working class boys aren't doing very well academically at the moment, and they're deserving of as much support as anyone else. So it concerns me that that's not mentioned here. But thank you for your explanation. I can't see any other hands up. So thank you, Liz. Very comprehensive presentation, and thank you everyone for taking all the questions. So if we move the recommendations then, including all the comments made including the ones made here, be sent to Cabinet for consideration as well. Have a seconder for that, Councillor Hennessy. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Liz. Okay, moving on to agenda item 8, task and finish review, additional learning needs resource bases. So Councillor Payne's going to take on this one. And before Helen starts, I'd like to thank all councillors who are on the task and finish group. And take it away, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I would have liked this to have been a main agenda item, so we could have devoted more time and effort to it, but I shall plough on. So the project aim was to assess the effective use and of public finances, that the resource bases, the additional learning needs resource bases in the Vale of Glamorgan, that they comply with the statutory duties of the ALN Act and meet the needs of the most vulnerable learners in their communities where possible. Additional learning need is recognised as a corporate risk, and therefore it is critical that this area receives the attention of us, our scrutiny committee. So this process began on the 10th of September last year, and the members of the committee are myself as chair, so Councillor Hennessy as vice chair, Councillor Asprey, Aviat, Gilligan and Hanks. This is a cross-party group and of enthusiastic people from different professions, from informal and non-formal education, teachers, retail workers, carpenter, rural and farm, I believe. So a real good selection of people, 99% of us as parents. And like I say, some of us have been involved in education and additional learning needs. So this report requests that the Scrutiny Committee consider the findings and recommendations of the Task and Finish group and reviewing the provision of additional learning needs resource bases. This is not a Scoladeri. These are learning bases based in primary and secondary schools across the Vale of Glamorgan. I will say that as a group, we worked very well. It was very democratic. We worked in collaboration. And what we did find as the process progressed was that we wanted to know more information. So we extended the visits. We did more visits than we had originally planned. So what I'm going to do is to bring in some of the other Task and Finish group members to get their perspective. But I was just going to go through what kind of bases there are initially. So for the primary sector in the Vale of Glamorgan, there is a complex needs base at Jenner Park Primary School. There's a speech, language and communication needs at Ysgol Ddraig, hearing support at Cogan Primary, autistic spectrum and anxiety at Halton Road Primary, and that is a brand new provision. Physical and medical needs at Palmerston Primary, anxiety and autistic spectrum at Ysgol Gwaun and Nant. And for the secondary sector, we have hearing support at St Cyrus, physical and medical needs at St Cyrus, an autistic spectrum base at Whitmore High, and a satellite Welsh medium base at Bro Morgannwg, and a satellite base at Pencoitry High School. So during our visits, we spoke to the children in the schools, some of the young people in the schools, the teachers, and some of the ancillary staff like canteen staff and learning support staff who were present in the building. We found all of the staff accessible. We found that the resource bases were well resourced, although there were some issues with inequitable buildings, shall we say, in terms of older Victorian buildings, but well adapted to meet the needs of the children and young people in there. So I'm just going to go on to some of the recommendations, because I think that is the most important thing, and it does cover a lot of the issues around where we went and what we found. So across the board, everybody, all the bases that we visited were very welcoming. All of our questions were answered. So one of the things we looked at was to strengthen funding stability and reduce grant dependency. So one of the things were around job security and not knowing if they could support the young people into the next funding round because there was short-term funding. So that was one of the issues around Also around outreach services, to reduce annual uncertainty and to enable sustainable staffing places. And that creates a security within the base with the children and young people they're working with too. So also to develop an exit risk strategy, identifying posts vulnerable to grant loss, particularly roles funded only until April 2026, and prepare mitigation options. Our second recommendation was around clarify roles and responsibilities between education and health. And we were quite surprised to find out that some of the needs of the young people, particularly in what were called the PMED bases, were about their physical needs or their medical needs, but they weren't necessarily funded by the health board. They were funded by education. So one of those recommendations then was to engage Welsh Government and Health Board regarding funding responsibilities for therapies and medical interventions currently failing schools, particularly in relation to the PMED base, speech and language, and the autistic spectrum bases. And then within that, to unpick that was around where was the clinical responsibility and the attendance at individual development plan meetings, sharing of data between health and education, and therapy provision. So this aims to reduce ambiguity and prevent therapy costs shifting onto the education budgets where we didn't think they should lie. The third thing was to improve consistency across the resource bases, introduce a uniform management structure, because what we found out as we went along, that certain people were managed by the ALN coordinator, some were managed by head teachers. So in order to have a uniform approach to line management, we were looking at, could that kind of be ironed out a little bit so that it was an equitable line management structure. So also to review comparative staffing structures, including alignment of learning support assistants, deployment across bases, ensuring equity with a scholar because we know there's a higher ratio of LSAs and also, sometimes different needs, but that also needs to be equitable. To develop a consistent authority-wide procurement framework for specialist equipment to ensure cost efficiency, and standardization across bases. Again, that was around cutting down costs for the local authority, but also making it easier to access equipment, across the board, really. And then again, continued investment in physical and digital resources. We looked at developing close collaborative relationships, and they have strengthened to ensure that the bases are aligned to the service needs and they continue to support each other. So that was collaboration between the bases, because I think sometimes they did feel isolated. So I'm now going to move on to the oversubscription. So we looked at actually, I'm not going to look at oversubscription, sorry. I'm going to change to our other recommendations. And that was to enhance data collection, So enhance data collection, monitoring, performance measures. So we needed to ensure that there was uniform data tracking across bases with similar functions, because they were different. We found that there were different systems that were used depending on the needs of the child or young person. Some of these examples, which maybe people can Google later, are B-squared, Seesaw, and Motional, so that we can look at progress data that is standardised, because it's not currently. So we could compare the progress of children and young people in an easy-to-understand format. Another thing was to look at key performance indicators across the board and to address access and capacity issues. So a standardized system of monitoring of spaces for one. So monthly issues of what the capacity of each base was, and also to prioritize expansion and capacity across the board, really. So there was another, ensure the timely development of the Welsh medium secondary additional learning needs base at Bro Morgannwg, ensuring alignment of entry requirements and transition planning with Welsh medium primaries. One of the things that we did at the end of our time with this task and finish was to look at the parents' perspective too. So that is included within the support, and it was around strengthening the relationship, because sometimes the feedback that we got from parents was that they were isolated because they didn't always do the school pick up and drop off. Sometimes the children were bussed in. So it was about support, parent to parent support, essentially. So maybe for individual schools to do that around the ALN bases. So that would be supporting communication and understanding the ALN process and IDP too. So possibly to encourage parent forums, but that would be dependent on that parent cohort, and to include direct parent voice. Because some of the feedback we got from parents was sometimes they didn't feel listened to in terms of the needs of their child. But, you know, it wasn't totally a negative thing. It was around just usually advocating for the needs of their child. The next issue was around improving transport consistency and value for money. So to review ALN transport to ensure consistency and entitlement and alignment with mainstream policy while avoiding duplication. So that was an issue for us too. You know, were there parents that could transport their children themselves? And then again, to look at different transport arrangements around fleet. So we then looked at strengthening strategic planning for future provision. So one of them was around inequitable building quality. For instance, the Jenner Park base, which is a fantastic Victorian building, did have some limitations within it, although they had, you know, phenomenal effort in making that building accessible and welcoming and well-resourced. And that was around space deficit. Sometimes maybe, you know, the physical space could have been more suitable, and, you know, making adaptations to accessibility requirements based on the needs of individual children or young people. And also with the rise in ALN, as we know, it's a corporate risk currently, looking at the future demand growth that we have within our current bases, you know, because this is a culture shift within education to try and keep young people as close to mainstream education as we can. And then mapping out currently the ALN need in primary schools to feed then into our secondary school bases. So we look at rising year sixes, you know, and where their school journey is going to go. Okay, so I think in conclusion, our overall conclusion was that the ALN provision across the Vale of Glamorgan provides high quality, child-centred, accessible education tailored to the needs of the learner. But some significant strategic risks were identified, and that was grant reliance, the cost of therapy, staffing pressures and recruitment difficulties, and recognised strengths were the highly committed and skilled staffs, and we could see that they absolutely go above and beyond, you know, developing their own resources to cater for the needs of the children and young people and learners. Good practice is evident across all bases. There is effective outreach services. The ALN coordinator, Liam, her knowledge was phenomenal in terms of what spaces were where, and the outreach services that are provided as well. Her knowledge, you know, was a brilliant positive from our perspective to the current provision. So there's strong pupil engagement around wellbeing, evidence of thoughtful, inclusive learning environments, and creative use of learning space. So we expressed appreciation for the staff and the commitment and emphasised the need for sustainable long-term funding and system improvements. So what we're being tasked now is to consider the findings of the Task and Finish group and to refer the recommendations on to Cabinet for approval. But I just want to thank also at the end of this process is the members of the Task and Finish group, the officers, the staff, the head teachers we met, the young people who sometimes shared very sensitive information with us, and the input of the parents. And I kind of now want to go over to other members of the Task and Finish group to look at their perspectives. So I don't know who wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Helen, for that
Thank you.
comprehensive report. Really appreciate it and all the work you've been doing. I can see Councillor Hennessy would like to come in.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank Councillor Payne for chairing this Task and Finish group. I praise her leadership and her thoroughness for being able to keep all us members in line. And sometimes it wasn't that easy for her because we are all very open-minded and independent people. I'd like to thank the officers and Gareth for all his hard work, because without Gareth and the officers, this wouldn't be going anywhere. And I think sometimes people forget this. But mainly, I think I want to thank the staff of all our ALN bases, because without them, our children would have nowhere to go. They would have no help. They would have no people to look after them. And when I visited Jenner Park with Councillor Asprey, the original appointment was supposed to last 30 minutes, like Anne will tell you. We ended up staying there for 3.5 hours because we enjoyed it so much, meeting the children and talking to them and listening to them and listening to the staff. And I think that's what we forget to do sometimes. We always see is ALN children, but we don't listen to them. We don't talk to them. And I think that's where we go wrong sometimes. But for myself, I can't praise the people enough. I think when Anne and I took part in the St. Barrack hearing and impairment and deaf part at St. Barrack, we all took part in it. That was the point of us being there. Same with Sally when we visited Lantry Major School. The teachers cared. The children wanted to listen to their teachers. They wanted to be in these lessons, learning. And at the end of the day, that is what we are here to do. We are here to listen and try to help the children to the best of our ability. And that's what should matter to anybody. Doesn't matter what the cost is. We should be listening and helping. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I thought that was a really comprehensive report from Councillor Payne. Thank you, Helen. I really enjoyed doing this Task and Finish. It was an area of work that I knew little about. I was very impressed in all aspects of the bases. The head teachers, we met quite a few of. They were welcoming and very open to us. Grants have already been mentioned by Helen. I did feel that the Vale maybe was supplementing the NHS costs in many areas, but I think Helen has mentioned that as well. Cost of tribunals is something we need to consider. And Leanne James was very helpful in organising the visits and taking us around. So she gave us a lot of her time and it was very, very helpful. And it was very interesting speaking to the parents, which sort of completed a circle. Our last meeting was meeting the parents, and a lot was learnt from that as well. So it was a very good task and finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Sorry, Chair. The final bit I wanted to add was around the original aim of the group. And I think in terms of the effective use of public finances, I think this is an effective use of public finances. And in a way, we're a victim of our own success in providing really, really good provision, additional leads provision in the Vale of Glamorgan. So, you know, the demand is increased, but the demand is also increased in the Vale because we have a good reputation, basically. So I just wanted to finish on that, really.
Thank you very much for that, Helen. And again, thank you to you and everyone, all the councillors who've taken part and the staff who've supported on this. It's great to see the work done on this issue. So I can't see any other hands up. So I'll move the recommendation that we refer the report onto Cabinet for consideration and approval of the task and finish group recommendations. If I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Hennessy, thank you very much. That's great. That's the final agenda item of the evening. So next meeting slated for the 18th of May. So thanks everyone for your participation, and Nostar.